And welcome back to Frankly Speaking. I'm your host, Frank. Tonight I got a very special guest on with me, Pete Pedrazzini of the Catholic Northman blog, who's joined me several times before here on Frankly Speaking, as well as the Knights of Christendom. And Pete is back with, how you doing, buddy?
Oh, I'm not doing too bad. Just recovering from all the smoke inhalation. Canada's on fire right now, if you didn't know.
Chastisement from God, possibly?
I don't know. It kind of seems like it might be.
Okay, well, we got Pete on tonight because what started making its rounds around the news here in America about a week and a half ago was all these graves up in Catholic schools. The one that's most prominent I heard about is Kamloops, a school up there in Canada, where 215 bodies of children, mostly of indigenous native, I guess, Canadians up there were discovered. Pete, from what I understand, these natives were being educated by the Catholic Church in Catholic schools, nuns, priests, things like that. And the discovery of these graves has led to the charge of genocide or mistreatment of the indigenous people. And so here we go again, just like in America here with the tearing down of the statues of Junipero Serra, who they claimed abused Native Americans. Here we got a story coming out of Canada. Lots of left-wing spin in the media down here. What can you tell me is going up in your neck of the woods up there, Pete?
Well, you got to understand a couple of different things about how these are called residential schools up in Canada. So after the Confederation of Canada, so the government wanted to take indigenous natives and basically, I guess, just equip them for the modern world. So they were taking them from their reservations and educating them. Now, it's important to keep in mind, this was a Canadian government's idea. The Canadian government started these residential schools and then basically dropped it into the laps of the Catholic Church and the Anglican Church and the Methodists, and said, you know, we're too cheap to care, so you guys basically take care of these kids. And a lot of times these schools were they weren't supplied with enough food, they weren't supplied with enough medicine or care, medical care, and blankets even. Yes, in the cold winters up here, of course, children are going to die. When this started breaking, this news, it was about, I'd say, the end of May or beginning of June up here when the Kamloops cemetery was discovered. They discovered it using ground penetrating radar. And from my understanding, this was an initiative taken by the indigenous people up here in Canada to find out where these graves were, because the graves, the original markers had worn away with time and disintegrated. And so they wanted to map it out and figure out where these graves were, because the Canadian government basically, when the school shut down, just closed everything down and let nature take its course. Now the Catholic Church is taking blame for this. It's not a mystery to see what's going on up here. This is a persecution, but the truth is being withheld from the people. This is not what's going on. This is the Canadian government's fault as much as it is anybody's. And we can tell just by the language being used in the media. The state-run media called them a mass grave when the first one was discovered. They called it a mass grave. That has implications that goes beyond a cemetery. You know, that's like me standing in front of Pine Hill Cemetery in the town that I live in and saying, hey, look, I found another mass grave. Look, it doesn't make any sense. But people are buying it up. They eat whatever the media tells them here. And of course, all kinds of activists are coming out of the woodwork now and either vandalizing or burning churches or having photo ops in front of them in some way, shape, or form to basically say the Catholic Church needs to step up and apologize or take responsibility for what's happened. No mention of the government whatsoever. No mention that many of these graves contain adults. Many of them contained adult parishioners. Some of them contained white children, not just native children. They're blowing the thing completely out of proportion. These are cemeteries, they're Catholic cemeteries. That's all they ever were. And I'm sure that if they decided to exhume these graves and do medical research on them, they're going to find that they died from tuberculosis or typhoid or any number of diseases that were common that anybody, no matter what their skin color, died from in those days. And so
Yeah.
basically, go ahead, Frank.
Yeah. What I was going to say, see, that's interesting to me because when I first heard about the story a couple weeks back, well, you were on with me a few weeks back, and you had mentioned it. But the first time I saw something in the American media about it, they use the term mass grave as well too, and you're absolutely right. That has implications. And as I was doing some research today, from my understanding here is it was not a mass grave; they were individual graves. So in essence, it's a graveyard, not a mass grave. When you use the mass grave term, it's almost like you're trying to imply that a genocide happened up in this particular school here at Kamloops. And so there seems to be a very dishonest assessment, right?
Oh, absolutely. And the Canadian government, as far as the person of Justin Trudeau goes, has even tried to say that it is a genocide and tried to get the parliament to agree that it was a genocide. Luckily, most of our members of parliament up here were smart enough not to take the bait and go down that road. But obviously, it's taken root in the minds of the leftists. I can't imagine who else would be doing these heinous acts of church burnings and whatnot. So they're trying to use those words: genocide, mass grave. They're trying to liken the Catholic Church to Hitler's regime or something like that. And it's causing frankly, a lot of fear and panic up here. Seeing it at a personal level at the church that I go to, and just in the media in general, there's a lot of Catholics that are upset. Even the native Catholics. The first churches that burned, the first two on June 25th, were both churches that were on reserves. They were in use. They weren't abandoned. The indigenous people there still go to the Catholic Church, but yet the leftist type indigenous folks are screaming that we ripped their culture away from them, and yet there's still Catholic natives, indigenous people here. So a lot of this doesn't make sense, and it seems like it's kind of funded in the same kind of sense as BLM. Up here we have something called Idle No More, which is basically the indigenous version of BLM. And this has been a group that's been getting stronger and more popular for the last couple or 3 years now. So I'm a little bit concerned about what's going to happen. And I'm sure that many Catholics feel the same way. Are they going to wake up the next morning as their church going to be the one that's burned down?
Yeah. My immediate reaction when I heard about this story was, well, first of all, being a history major myself, I know there's lots of nuances in history, how things take place. And oftentimes viewing history from what I call presentism, from the present moment, and viewing going back and judging history from our values today in a completely different world is a grand mistake. And so when I look at an event like this, I already become skeptical, simply because if we know the history of the Catholic Church, it never forcefully infused any of its values into any culture. The beautiful thing about the Catholic faith was that it intermixed in regards to culture and customs. Granted, it maintained the fidelity of the faith, the fidelity of Christ, but it never forced it. And mainly because it's in Catholic doctrine that free will is part of our faith. If you don't accept Christ freely, or we force people to accept the Catholic faith, apart from this free will, it actually contradicts our own doctrine. So I immediately become skeptical, Pete, when I hear stories like this. Now, another thing I'm hearing, I don't know if you know anything about this, but news report I was watching, they're acknowledging, readily available, just that there was individual abuses by priests and nuns in some of these schools. Is that verifiable, or is that just more leftist sort of slant in your opinion?
In my opinion, it's a leftist slant. Of course, there's always been abuses by priests and other clergymen, women. Um, the fact that Judas has always been amongst us is no secret, but uh, the way it's being spun is that they're taking, for example, I saw scrolling through Facebook one day, and one of my friends was posting this pro indigenous support thing, and it listed about 20 different cases of abuse. One of them I remember reading was something like a nun kicked somebody to death, like a little girl to death or something like that. When I started hearing things like that, you know, there's Judas, and then there's like ridiculous. Like I don't. Can you imagine? Can
Yeah.
you imagine a nun kicking somebody to death? Like honestly,
Yeah.
I think a lot of these stories are made up. In fact, the other day I was just on checking my Gmail account, and I got an email from a lawyer out of New York asking for anybody to come forward with any kind of abuse claims against the Catholic Church, anything, whether it was verbal abuse or you got wrapped on the hand with a ruler or whatever. The lawyers are out there just waiting for people to come forward and make money off of them. And those people are happy to make money off the system if they can get, if they can get in there and say, oh, I was abused, and then they can get $500,000 from the government. Of course, they're going to come forward and do this. Is the way the legal system works these days. It's all money talks. So I think a lot of these stories and stuff are false, or they're twisted to the point of taking the truth and just completely upending it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's funny to me because whenever we hear about these stories about the Catholic Church and about the nuns that were abusive or the priests that were abusive, whipping, their students with rulers and things like that, and corporal punishment. It's interesting because as a Catholic, as a lifelong Catholic myself, with lots of exposure to the Catholic faith, I've never witnessed or experienced any of those horrid stories that many people claim. And so I've always found that interesting. But I think, too, what we have to remember, just like in the case of St. Junipero Serra down here in California during, his period, his reign, corporal punishment was a part of Western civilization. It was used throughout Latin America in many respects, and corporal punishment was that means by how we kept order. And it wasn't just for indigenous people, it was also for, guess what, Latin Americans. It was for Catholics, other Catholics in that respect too. And I think a lot of times we have this historical interpretive principles, how the world was at that time and how it governed itself. And in many respects, when you look at a liberal world gone mad today, Pete, you almost wonder if we need to bring back some forms of corporal punishment in retrospect. But that's how the world governed over there. And so it's easy in our sort of soft world, our touchy-feely, sensitive, we're all offended kind of a world, for us to look at a moment where maybe corporal punishment was used in another time and era and say, that's abuse, right?
Was it even that long ago? I mean, when I was in elementary school, junior high, they still had what was called the strap. And that, that was no picnic, but that was basically corporal punishment. I mean, what am I going to go back to the public school system now and demand retribution? Do I want my piece of that $500,000 cake too?
Sure.
Why not just blame everybody in the past?
Sure.
That's basically what it is now. It's like why are we taking responsibility for things that happened 100 years ago? Or even the Crusades?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And I feel like this whole mentality about the Catholic Church forcing the religion on people, like you were mentioning earlier, kind of started with the Crusade. I guess when I was in high school, going through the history classes, they taught that the Crusades basically forced Christianity on people. So it's the next logical step to think that the education system for the last 50 years has been telling people that the Catholic Church has forced the religion on people. That's what they naturally think. And it doesn't take much from the media to get people's heads spinning on that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. Listen, I've had guys from Real Crusade History on our show over the Dice of Christendom, and it was never about forced religion. It was about defense of, again, Latin America, Western Europe in that respect. Again, a different world with different circumstances, different enemies, and how you sort of dealt with the problems of the world. It was a defense of Christendom. That's what the Crusades ultimately were, despite all the historical spin. And I think it does come down to, again, a leftist kind of a propaganda to overthrow the West, whether it's BLM or whether it's Antifa or whether it's, far left politicians, whatever it may be. We have a civilization that has been consumed by sort of Marxist and liberalism here at this point in history. They've embedded themselves in all the institutions of the world. And the first thing they have to do, Pete, is erase the history of Christendom, because Christendom was really the premise by which all of the West was built upon. If you're going to build a brave new world, a great reset, you have to erase the past. We saw that, in the Soviet Union when Marxism came in, Leninism came in, Joseph Stalin came in. They started renaming the towns and, away from the old world and the Christian world. You got to erase that memory. It's funny. I was just thinking to myself, how long before we start renaming all these Catholic cities? Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco here in America, all named after Catholic saints or Catholic symbolism. It's only a matter of time until those names become a present. Again, Marxism has always tried to erase the past, to erase the memory of the familial system that once governed Western civilization. And just what you're telling me here doesn't surprise me, because it really is the same effects of what we've seen in America, to erase America's history, to erase Catholic history. Sounds like the same thing is going on in Canada to me.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And what does our brave prime minister do? If this had been a synagogue, if it had been a mosque,
yeah,
he would have been on prime time, and he would have been saying, I hate crime. But you know what he said? You know what all he said so far? This is unfortunate.
Yeah.
This is
amazing.
Unfortunate.
Now, is he a Catholic? Baptized Catholic?
He claims he is. He claims he is.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, I know. I'm not surprised by that, because I found in my life that the most ardent anti-Catholics are the ex-Catholics. They are. So let me ask you this. Okay, we have, again, Western values, old traditional Catholic Western values, under siege all over really Western Europe and America now, all throughout the West. All of our values are being attacked at this point. What's your take on what's going to happen in Canada with this incident? Are Catholics just going to cave in and not fight this and just accept what's inevitable, and that is the rewriting of history? Do you think Catholics, or are Catholics actually making a fight? You tell me.
Well, I would say it's much like it is anywhere else. I think that the young, traditional-minded families are growing. They will continue to grow, and eventually they will be the flower of the church.
Yeah.
The old school, the post-Vatican II felt banner, guitar mask folks, they're dying out. Their time is through. Their rejuvenation of the church that they hoped for didn't happen. That part of the church will die. And I think what's going to happen is that good priests, whether Novus Ordo or traditional, will eventually come together in some kind of unity. And I think we'll just eventually be a new church again. We'll be the springtime of the church again. I think in some ways what's going on with these kinds of persecutions here is that it's not really, of course, that the latest motu proprio from Francis about banning the Latin Mass or whatnot has been given to the jurisdiction of the bishops. And I tried looking for Canadian Catholic bishops, their CCCB, what their stance is on it. Nothing, nothing, nothing. It's all silence. Why? Because I think, in my opinion, that what's going on right now, the scandal, these residential school things, this persecution, these church burnings, have them thinking, is that really the thing to be thinking about right now? Is that really the fight? Is that the hill we want to die on right now? Because we're really at the end of our time here as far as physically being able to do anything. I don't know if that makes any sense, but we are being attacked physically now. And it's just a matter of time before the next church that's lit on fire is going to have people in it. So I think there's going to be a strong push towards unity here amongst Catholics. At the same time, I think the old guard's going to die out and there's going to be a lot of persecution. But as I say, persecution exists because their plans are failing. So, and by they I mean whoever the New World Order is, whoever's trying to do whatever to the West right now to get it even farther down the path of Satanism or liberalism or whatever. Their plans are failing, so they have to start bringing out the persecutions. So that's my take on what I think is going to happen.
Yeah, I think we're at a critical moment in history right now. I think we all feel the heat, those of us that still hold Christian values. And, I've been talking a lot about this, Pete, is that, I'll be 50 years old this year in October. And just in my lifetime alone, we've seen such a radical change in morality and mores and sort of the principles we once governed by, that I'm not sure that any other generation has gone through such a radical change of morality. I think I would bet, and while culture is always evolving, don't get me wrong, I would bet that our ancestors, grandparents, and great-grandparents had much more stable systems of governance, as well as political systems of governance, on top of morality. I just think it's a very interesting time. Too much is unfolding, and it's hard not to think, when things like this are happening all over the globe, where Catholics appear to be being chastised, I guess you could say, it's not hard to really, reflect back and look at Our Lady's apparitions and say to ourselves, oh my goodness, she was right about all of it, Pete.
Yeah, and I remember back in 2017, September 2017, there was that constellation Virgo. I don't know if you remember that, but the Jupiter passed through the womb of Virgo. Leo was at the feet of Virgo, and the tri-crown was at her head.
Yeah.
And people were making all kinds of speculations what that was. Well, that was 2017. That was 100 years after 1917. And if you think about that, maybe that is a sign that things are about to change. And I've always kind of secretly thought that. I don't really want to out and out say it because I'm not an astrologist or anything like that, but that time I think it is around the corner, and we've just got to hang on for a little bit longer. And I think we're living in an interesting time. We have to look at it that way too. It's not just scary, but it's also kind of cool. We're going to be in the future history books.
We're going to be Bible stories of the future. Listen, I know the canon is closed. Protestants, please, I understand that. My point is that I think when they look back at us 100, 200, 300, 500 years down the line, I think they're going to say, boy, those people were living through biblical times. I was talking to a classical liberal friend of mine the other day, and we're kind of chatting back and forth politics about all the craziness in the world, and especially in America right now. And I was telling them, not only is this a crazy time, because Pete, every generation that has lived since the time of Christ believed that the end was here, right? I mean, you go back just to the World War II, World War I generation, the 19th century full of revolutions, the 17th century full of revolutions. I mean, you go down here, every generation can claim, and there's good reason to believe why they believe their days were the last days. But there's one game changer here that I told my classical liberal friend that those generations never have to deal with, that we have to deal with. And that is the utter breakdown of the family. The family has been destroyed. We've seen political upheavals, we've seen religious upheavals, but the Marxists in the past 100 years have attacked the family and decimated the family. And I don't believe there's any coming back from this, Pete.
Yeah, and not only that, but it's at a global level. Like, it's not like you could say the early Christians or Middle Ages or whatever thought these same kind of thoughts too. Maybe the troubles they faced were more local. I think now with the internet and with the connectivity of the world between the international community, I guess, yeah, it's the destruction of the family is not just in North America. It's in Europe. It's the Soviet Union, Russia. It's everywhere. And truly, the errors of Russia has spread throughout the world, as Our Lady said they would.
Yeah. Yeah, she was dead on right. And so we will see what happens. Listen, Pete, to wrap it up tonight, I mean, this sure feels like a chastisement of sorts. We're getting it here in America. You're getting it there. It's also spreading all over Europe right now. You got a few strongholds like Poland and Hungary that are trying to hold on to the last vestiges of tradition and decency, but they're being attacked by the New World Order left and right. As far as Canada's future, what are you seeing there?
Well, I think I've mentioned this before, but maybe perhaps the last time we talked, that I think Canada's future is going to be that the map is going to change. There will be a separation of a couple of different provinces up here. Will probably separate from Canada. There's a likelihood of that. I think the church burnings are going to keep on going. We're up to now, between vandalisms and burnings, 50 is the last report that I've heard. Um, I I think that probably for the next year we're going to see a good amount of persecution going on. I wouldn't be surprised if it's going to get to the point where people's lives are going to be taken. And I don't know. Canada is such a weird place. Like, it's so different than the States in some ways. In some ways, so much like it too.
Yeah.
The culture here is so different from coast to coast. The way people interact with each other or think of each other, it's hard to say. I think we might see a resurgency of Catholicism in the East, in Quebec, in the French-speaking part of Canada. There's a lot of things. It's really hard. Like, I know that the liberals, the communists, they're going to try and keep all of this stuff down, but I do think that the biggest thing, the most important thing is that whatever Our Lady's going to do to bring about the peace throughout the world and the rejuvenation of the Catholic Church it's going to be that one thing. It's going to be that one thing that the New World Order guys didn't think of.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I think the crisis in the church today doesn't help, and I think it is the fundamental problem. I've been saying for a long time, Pete, as we wrap this cast up tonight, that the world currently is missing a moral arbiter of truth. In America, we're used to chants of freedom, liberty, money, money, money. Let's all make the money together, kind of a thing. And I keep saying, well, there's a purpose to prosperity, and we're human beings, and there is a natural side of us. There's also a supernatural side of us. And we're starting to fade as a culture, not just socially and morally, but also spiritually. The world lacks a moral arbiter of truth. It used to be the Catholic Church. It used to be. And for whatever reason, we get into conspiracies and things like that. The church has become ashamed of itself and ashamed of its mission. And it really won't change until the church finds itself again. I agree with the theory that's been passed around by a lot of Catholic sort of talking heads that say that the church is in the midst of its passion. Just as our Lord had to carry his cross to the crucifixion, that's where the church is today. And that's why I say what we're living through is historic right now, and we all get to play a role at this point in history. Pete, my friend, thank you for joining me tonight.
Thank you for having me on again.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's Pete Pedrazzini, of the Catholic Northman blog. You catch his show right here on YouTube. He gives you all the info on the Catholic faith as well as what's going on in Canada. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. This is Frank. Good night, everybody.